was thinking about why when you live a proper life, you have almost no fear of death. When you know how to write your story, and when you write your story by listening to this voice within you, you have no fear of death at all because you know that your life has meaning and you follow this meaning. And if something happened on its way, it's beyond your control and you try not to think about it. You're more confident about yourself and about your story. Maybe because you authoring your own life and don't depend on circumstances and have no fear of accidents. And maybe death is just the gate to the next level. And to be able to go through this gate, maybe we need to develop the self, because the self keeps living on when your body dies. But how you can develop the self? You have this little tiny voice within you that you have to learn how to listen, because it's constant practice. You keep listening this voice within, and this voice tells you what way you should take and what road you should follow. And you have to follow this voice, because that's what makes you you. That's what creates the self. And you constantly have to practice to keep developing the self. That's, I think, the point of life, because the self will tell you where the meaning and what direction you should take to find this meaning. We're all thinking about death, and we all try to deal with that notion because we all die in the end. And I know there's a good theory like you don't experience death, other people experience your death like you experience the death of others. It's very interesting theory, it makes sense, but from the position of living person, from biological perception. But what if we're not only the biology? What if we have this self that will outlive our biology? But to be able to outlive our biology, we have to have faith in the self and keep faith in our voice, this little tiny voice to tell us what right thing to do. Because how do we know what's right and what's wrong? We develop theology, we develop the idea of God, we develop religion, we develop the notion of soul that's supposed to outlive our biological existence, and we keep persisting in this idea. And I don't like when some people engaged in sophistry. They try to use reasoning to justify almost everything, because that's what you do when you don't have foundation. Because if you ask somebody, you don't believe in God, right? Why? And this person tells you, because there's no evidence. And if there's no evidence, I'm not going to believe in God. And then you tell this person, but how about love? How about goodness? There's no evidence for love. There's no evidence for goodness. And this person would tell you that love is just a chemical reaction in your brain that can be checked. Also, you can observe this how it influences your life, love, and the same with the goodness, because several people agree what good and what bad, and they follow this feeling. And then you said, but you can say the same thing about God, because you cannot test it, but you can, for example, check that people who believe in God live much more better life because they have some idea within them that helps them to make proper sacrifice, and as the result of the proper sacrifice, these people have much more successful life and more mental stability within them, less depressed, and also they have goal to find the true meaning of their life, and it's really worth a lot. Because I look at the people, and some people terrorize themselves with the jobs they hate. And when you ask them, why do you need this job? Why you keep staying on this job that you hate? And they tell, the money is good, and I don't have much opportunities. And then you look at them, you spend 60, 70 hours a week on a job you hate. And this is your life. It's not easy money. This is your life that you waste on hate towards something that you spend a lot of time on. And that's where the story goes bad. That's where a foundation crumbling underneath them. Because if you have solid foundation through the self, because why you don't like the job? Because something within you, like this little tiny voice, tells you it's not you. It's not what you need to do. You need to find something else, but you keep suppressing this voice, creating cognitive dissonance that tear you apart. And once it tear you apart, yourself start dying because you stop listening to this voice. And once you practicing, stop listening to this voice getting more silent and more silent until one day it can just dies. And it's very dangerous because you're losing the self, you're losing what makes you really you, and become just empty shell of persona that you can see on the picture online. And when people spend lifetime on these jobs waiting for their retirement, eventually they go on pension without having self, because they never wrote a story, they never found the meaning, and their self, even if it's still alive, incredibly silent most of the time, or whispering slightly something that they cannot understand because they never practicing understanding of the self. And if you have no respect for the self, how you can even love somebody? There's another interesting idea like love your neighbor. Yes, but before loving your neighbor, you have to have self-respect, because self-respect helps you to discriminate with your neighbor. It helps you to tell your neighbor the truth, because love somebody doesn't mean lie to somebody, doesn't mean not to tell somebody the truth about them and about their beliefs, their ideologies. If somebody walking off the cliff, you have to stop this person. That's what love is. It's not tolerance to their idea of kill themselves because of their ignorance. Your point is to stop them before it's too late. And a lot of people confuse the tolerance for something that just a cowardice with no foundation. That's what tolerance with no foundation. If you have no frame, you can expand this frame almost infinitely. Because we all need frame, we all need borders, we all need walls within us to know what we can and cannot do and what we will never do. But if you keep expanding the frame and crumble everything inside of this frame, eventually you have nothing, have no borders, and therefore you have a lot of information, but you aren't able to discriminate within this information, and therefore you cannot find comprehensible picture of the world itself. And since you cannot find comprehensible picture of the world itself, you cannot find yourself inside of this world, because there's no center, and you cannot be a center if you just biology, because yourself is the center, and yourself is the voice within you. And if you don't listen this voice within you, you don't exist. It's just your biology that keep living in some sort of fearful existence before future death, and therefore it tried to stuff itself with a bunch of bad things to satisfy its urges. And that's why it's a good example to check if your life is good or not. Like I usually check on myself. Am I afraid to die? I always ask myself a question. What would I feel if I know that I will die tomorrow, or in a week, or in a month? And when I ask myself this question, I usually respond to I'm going to do the same what I'm doing right now, because I love what I'm doing. I find meaning in what I'm doing. And therefore, if I have to die tomorrow or in a month, it's fine, because I know why I'm here, and I love what I'm doing, and I'll see the meaning in what I'm doing. And I think that's what everybody should ask this question, because this way you can test if it's right way or a wrong way. That's why people scream, this cognitive dissonance within people who force others to be tolerant. They're incredibly intolerant as the result of their tolerance. It makes no sense, because why would you scream? Because you believe in your idea of tolerance, although you're incredibly intolerant to yourself and to other people's self. You only have this tolerance, you display this tolerance on the surface without going deeper in a real self, this manifestation of self in yourself and in other people. That's why we're so obsessed now in current culture. That's what current culture forces people to hate it, and while being incredibly tolerant to someone who hateful to this culture. Because it's making no sense. When people say you have to love your neighbor and then tells you have to hate the country or the civilization that was built on the idea of love your neighbor. How are you supposed to really love your neighbor? There's so much contradiction and this stupid sophistry where the people use incredibly smart and intelligent words, but they make no sense because there's no frame and you cannot test because there's no frame again. It's just endless word salad. And there's not a single truth underneath because nobody want to commit themselves to that truth. It's like I heard one of the people who do AI safety research, right? On one of the podcasts, somebody asked him about this $1 billion labs, AI labs, and he said, if somebody gave me $1 billion, I probably would go work for them and abandon my AI safety stuff. In other words, if he really believed that AI represents danger, why would he abandon this noble goal for $1 billion? And he justified it because he said, we're humans, we're corruptible. It means this person have no idea about a proper sacrifice, because if you have idea about proper sacrifice, you would say, yes, it's going to be hard, but I will sacrifice this $1 billion because I believe in my cause that I have to save or participate in the safety of this planet because I truly believe that AI is dangerous. But unfortunately this person right away lost his ground since he doesn't have no frame, and you cannot have frame if you have no God on your side. That's what God is very important, and religious and is very important because you need this frame. Without frame there's no self, and without self there's no ground to stand upon because the self is the center. It helps you to understand who you are, and it helps you to take responsibility for your life, and also it tells you for what you should die for, because one day maybe you should make the sacrifice for something that really matters. But if you have no frame, if you have no idea who you are, then there's no sacrifices, and if there's no sacrifice, there's going to be no stories. It's only going to be some other short video on TikTok that gives you partially some idea of story, but not story at all. That's why we have to read books, good books, because they give us the idea what we should correct and edit about our own story. This, when you watch good movie or read great books, you have this feeling if your story is correct or not, because you kind of feel some dissonance, cognitive dissonance within you. But if you don't feel it much, it means your story is correct, because you have to author your own story, you have to author your own life. Otherwise you just become like everybody else, empty shell of useless persona with a picture on your profile in online world that not even real but digital representation of something very empty but artificially beautiful.